The baseline of academic observation rests on the positivist model. In the social sciences, this paradigm requires the observer to be completely removed from the equation to measure reality accurately. Under this rule, objectivity depends on total detachment. Humans inhabit the systems they try to study. We are constantly interacting with our environments, making total detachment a physical impossibility. For decades, orthodox methodologies have policed this boundary. Major texts on research design state that the scholarly community prioritizes what can be demonstrated over what is personally experienced. This creates a methodological blind spot. Because researchers are enveloped by their subjects, attempting to excise their presence obscures the complex interactions occurring between the observer and the observed. Erasing the author from the research results in an artificially incomplete dataset, rather than a pristine record of facts. Within the academy, using personal narrative or experiential data often meets with skepticism. Critics frequently categorize this approach as a form of analytical weakness. An alternative framework exists in relational epistemology. This is the study of knowledge generated in the space between interconnected subjects, moving away from the idea of extracting data from passive objects. This model proposes that subjectivity can function as a tool of inquiry when it is bound by ethical and psychological architectures. Scientific rigor in this view requires mapping the researcher's own entanglement within a system to account for the distortions that detached observation might miss. Autoethnography functions as a formal methodology for conducting cultural analysis from a vulnerable insider perspective. Carol Cohn's 1980s research provides a case study for this method. She spent a year embedded with defense intellectuals at a center for technology and arms control, analyzing the strategists responsible for nuclear deterrence. She identified a techno-strategic language. Defense experts used this abstract vocabulary to discuss nuclear war and human casualties while avoiding the visceral reality of the weapons. Cohn reached a pivot point by documenting her own psychological absorption of this language. She tracked her shifting mindset as she became more fluent in the strategist's specialized dialect. Her internal realization, asking herself, "How could I think this way?" served as the primary data point for her study. Her shifting mind provided a record of how bureaucratic jargon actively overwrites the human capacity to comprehend the horror of war. Extracting data from lived experience creates friction with academic governments, specifically institutional review boards, or IRBs. Academic ethics operate linearly: secure approval, observe, and publish. IRBs require a complete accounting of variables up front. However, experiential research is cyclical and retroactive, extracting information from past events that have already shaped the researcher, making upfront variable identification impossible. Relational ethics provides the methodological solution. Instead of a single upfront permission form, researchers engage in continuous negotiation with the people in their narrative. For academic researchers, replacing rigid upfront contracts with fluid ethical protocols is what protects the others occupying their narrative orbit. This requirement for structure also applies to high-stress clinical nursing simulations. These scenarios engineer subjectivity in real time to facilitate training. In these exercises, nurses handle a volatile patient pain crisis. The scenario involves high-alert medications and is designed to trigger learner anxiety, mimicking the pressures of a real-world medical emergency. Without a structured architecture, the subjective panic of the learner would consume their processing capacity, preventing them from acquiring new skills. Educators prevent this breakdown by establishing a safe container. The first pillar is the pre-brief, which creates a fiction contract, ensuring learners understand the space is non-evaluative. Secondary pillars, like Pearl's debriefing and structured observer checklists, keep participants engaged analytically. These tools prevent the learners from being overwhelmed by the engineered stress. These safety architectures are what allow us to process the chaotic subjective experience of a medical crisis as analytical data. Cognitive load dictates the brain's capacity to process new information. Environmental stress instantly spikes this load into the red zone, stopping objective data processing. Active interventions, like checklists, push the load back into the functional green zone, reopening learning capacity. This mechanism bridges the gap between clinical and academic models. Just as a nursing prebrief manages cognitive load in a simulation, relational ethics manage the emotional vulnerability of the autoethnographer. Both systems, clinical safety protocols and academic relational ethics, serve the same empirical function. They provide the necessary structure for subjectivity to yield objective insight. This brings us to a final question. If we move past the requirements of quantitative reproducibility, how do we demonstrate that experiential data is valid? Puzzle-driven inquiry provides the solution. This framework shifts the metric of success from pure reproducibility to practical utility. Experiential insights derive their validity from their ability to function within specific knowledge communities. The benchmark is efficacy. If a researcher's subjective vulnerability or a learner's simulated panic clarifies a disciplinary puzzle that detached observation could not, the data earns its legitimacy. Qualitative data proves its worth when it provides solutions to intractable, real-world problems that traditional metrics fail to capture. Extracting rigorous data from the self requires 3 prerequisites: openness to the world, ethical safety, and transparent analysis of one's entanglement. These elements must interconnect to stabilize the data pulled from human experience. Methodological openness, psychological safety, and puzzle-driven inquiry lock subjective chaos into a verifiable structure. Ultimately, academic rigor is the transparent, ethical, and highly structured application of the self to the world's most complex systems.